That summer of 1998, the small town of Redfield, Ohio, shimmered under the heavy warmth of July. The Walker family gathered at Aunt Eleanor's century-old Victorian home to celebrate her 70th birthday. The house was a museum of heirlooms, glass cabinets lined with porcelain figurines, polished silver tea sets, and the crown jewel, a ruby pendant passed down through generations of women. It gleamed from its place in the display case, drawing quiet admiration from guests. The day unfolded with the usual rhythm of family gatherings. Laughter spilled from the kitchen, the scent of roasted chicken mingled with the sweetness of layered cake, and cousins raced through the garden. Marians Walker, Eleanor's niece, moved quietly between rooms, helping with trays and drinks. She felt the weight of polite smiles from certain relatives, the kind that carried more judgment than warmth. The pendant remained untouched, a silent witness to the festivities. As evening settled in, the crowd began to thin. Empty glasses clinked in the sink, and discarded ribbons from wrapped gifts littered the side table. In the dimming light, the ruby caught the last golden beams of sunset before the cabinet door was quietly closed. Marians took a moment on the porch, enjoying the cool air, unaware that inside, the night's turning point had already begun to form. It was just after the last guests left when a murmur of alarm rippled through the few remaining family members. The cabinet stood open, the velvet cushion where the pendant had rested now bare. Conversations dropped to hushed tones, eyes darting between one another. The absence of the jewel was like a sudden hollow space in the room. Eleanor's expression hardened, and whispers started to take shape, carrying names unspoken. Within an hour, the search was in full swing. Every drawer, every corner of the parlor was turned over. The atmosphere had shifted, laughter replaced by the rustle of frantic hands and sharp footsteps across hardwood floors. When the pendant did appear, it was found in the unlikeliest of places, buried beneath a silk scarf in Marian's handbag left by the chair in the hall. The discovery was met with a chorus of stunned silence. The shock quickly gave way to suspicion. Some avoided her eyes entirely, others stared openly as if the verdict were already decided. There was no rush to hear her explanation. The scene itself told them what they wanted to believe. Her hands felt numb, the edges of the room sharpening in her vision as though she stood under a spotlight she had never asked for. By the next morning, the whispers had evolved into a settled story. Neighbors who hadn't attended the party somehow already knew. The narrative painted her as careless at best, dishonest at worst. At the grocery store, familiar faces offered curt nods instead of greetings. Her name became something to lower one's voice for, the unspoken judgment hanging heavier than words. Marians knew the pendant had been planted, the choice of item deliberate for its sentimental value and visibility. She replayed the evening in her mind, searching for moments when her bag had been left unattended. Yet each possible scenario dissolved into fragments, offering no clear image of the culprit. The knowledge of her innocence was a cold comfort in the face of the family's certainty. She recognized that a single wrong move, an outburst, a defensive tone, could cement their belief in her guilt. Silence became her shield, though it left her isolated. She stayed away from calls and visits, letting the story settle rather than feed it. The ruby pendant, once a symbol of family heritage, had become the wedge driving her further from the people she had grown up with. In the weeks after the pendant's disappearance, invitations to family gatherings stopped arriving. Holiday dinners, birthday parties, and casual Sunday lunches went on without her. She would hear about them only through overheard conversations at the market or by glimpsing photographs posted in shop windows. The absence of her name on any guest list felt deliberate, each omission a silent confirmation of her exile. At her workplace, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Colleagues who once lingered at her desk for small talk now offered only brief nods in passing. Lunch invitations dried up. The story had traveled beyond the walls of Aunt Eleanor's house, reshaped and sharpened with each retelling until it seemed like common knowledge. It no longer mattered that no one had seen her take anything. Her mother avoided the topic entirely, moving through their shared kitchen with the careful silence of someone walking over thin ice. Her father's only advice was to wait for the scandal to fade. To Marians, it was like asking a drowning person to hold still in the water. Waiting would not erase the mark on her name. Every day without action felt like losing more of herself. She sensed her reputation collapsing piece by piece, each interaction removing another support beam. Even casual acquaintances now looked at her differently. The woman at the post office, who once chatted about the weather, handed her letters without a smile. The grocer placed her change on the counter rather than in her palm. Small gestures spoke loudly when repeated enough times. In that silence and distance, determination began to take root. Marians resolved to clear her name, even if the path to doing so was unclear. The challenge lay in the absence of proof. No witness, no record, no way to trace the chain of events that had placed the pendant in her bag. She would have to create her own evidence if she hoped to dismantle the lie. Her attention turned to Jennifer, the cousin whose hand had so conveniently revealed the pendant that night. The memory replayed often. Jennifer's quick reach into the bag, the way she'd held the jewel aloft with an almost triumphant lift of her chin. The moment had been too perfect, too well-timed, as though rehearsed in advance. Jennifer's behavior in the days afterward only deepened suspicion. She moved through gatherings with a calmness that felt unnatural, especially given the supposed gravity of the theft. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no sign of discomfort when Marian's absence was mentioned. Instead, there was a faint satisfaction, subtle but unmistakable, that settled in the curve of her mouth. Marians began observing from the edges of public spaces where family members occasionally crossed paths. She noted who Jennifer spoke to, how long the conversations lasted, and whether laughter followed. Each encounter seemed to reinforce the idea that Jennifer had not only avoided suspicion, but had gained a certain approval for her role in discovering the missing heirloom. Though the evidence was thin, Marians felt the pieces aligning in her mind. The theft had been more than a moment of opportunity. It had been staged. But knowing it and proving it were worlds apart. She would need patience, and she would need to wait for the right moment to turn the quiet weight of exile into the sharp edge of truth. Marians knew that confronting Jennifer without proof would only backfire. Every accusation without evidence would be twisted against her. If she was to expose the truth, she needed a plan so precise that no one could question the outcome. The idea had to appear harmless, its purpose hidden beneath the surface until the moment it was revealed. She chose an object from Aunt Eleanor's collection, a silver jewelry box that, while valuable, was less sentimental than the stolen pendant. It was small enough to be taken easily, but distinctive enough to be noticed if missing. The box had delicate engravings along its edges, the kind of detail that drew attention when held. It would serve as the perfect bait. Before placing it back in the display, she prepared her safeguard. Inside the lid, invisible to the naked eye, she drew a minuscule mark with special ink that glowed only under ultraviolet light. It was her silent signature, one that could not be removed without damaging the box. With it, she could prove beyond doubt where the item had been and who had taken it. The second step was surveillance. Marians purchased a miniature camera disguised as a picture frame. She placed an old family photo inside, something familiar enough to blend in with the cluttered charm of the sitting room. The frame joined a row of knickknacks on a shelf, positioned to capture both the display cabinet and the surrounding space. She tested the angle repeatedly, adjusting it until the view was clear and unobstructed. The camera's memory card could hold several hours of footage, enough to cover the entirety of a family gathering. She knew that if Jennifer made a move, the lens would see everything. Technology, in this case, would be her impartial witness. Still, she understood that a trap was useless without the right lure. Jennifer would need a reason to approach the display without arousing suspicion. Marians couldn't simply leave the room and hope. It had to be structured, predictable, a moment engineered for temptation. That was when the idea took its final shape. She decided to propose a game during the next holiday gathering, something lighthearted to lower everyone's guard. A family treasure hunt sounded innocent enough, a way to entertain guests and involve them in exploring the old house. The silver box would be one of the prizes, placed so that Jennifer might encounter it naturally. The beauty of the plan was in its invisibility. To the family, it would appear as nothing more than festive amusement. No one would suspect the hidden purpose, not even Jennifer, especially Jennifer. If she acted as Marian suspected, the theft would be caught in real time, without a single word of accusation beforehand. In the days leading up to the gathering, Marians refined every detail. She wrote riddles that would guide participants from room to room, timing each stage so that Jennifer's turn would place her in the sitting room alone. Every step was deliberate, calculated, and quiet, ensuring the trap would spring without a sound. By the time the day approached, she felt a steady calm settle over her. The pieces were in place, the stage set. All that remained was to wait for the curtain to rise and watch the story unfold exactly as she had scripted it. The holiday gathering began in a warm haze of chatter and clinking dishes. Marians moved through the rooms with quiet purpose, greeting relatives and making sure every detail of her plan was ready. In the sitting room, the silver box gleamed subtly among the displayed trinkets. The camera's lens, hidden within the picture frame, waited patiently for its moment. After the meal, she announced the game. A family treasure hunt, she explained, with clues hidden throughout the house. Laughter rippled through the crowd at the idea, and several guests leaned in with curiosity. It seemed harmless, a way to turn the afternoon into something lively and playful. The first riddle was handed out, and the search began. The game moved from the kitchen to the hallway, from the upstairs landing to the library. Each clue had been carefully placed to guide the group while keeping the atmosphere light. Marians monitored the pace, ensuring the timing matched the structure she had rehearsed. The final clue, written in her neat script, pointed directly to the sitting room. As planned, participants filtered in small groups to each location. When Jennifer's turn arrived, the others were conveniently drawn away by a suggestion to fetch drinks from the kitchen. Voices and footsteps faded, leaving the sitting room momentarily quiet. Only the hum of the heating vent and the faint creak of floorboards filled the space. Jennifer stepped toward the display shelf, her movements smooth but deliberate. She glanced toward the doorway, then toward the hall, as if measuring her privacy. Her hand reached for the silver box, fingers curling around it with a quick, decisive grip. In one motion, she slipped it into her bag, covering it with a folded scarf. The camera's red recording light remained invisible, its silent witness capturing every frame. Jennifer hesitated only briefly before stepping back, her expression returning to practiced neutrality. She rejoined the others with the casual air of someone who had merely been searching for the next clue. From her position near the kitchen doorway, Marian saw the exchange from a distance. She kept her expression relaxed, even friendly, showing no hint that she had noticed anything unusual. The game continued, her voice steady as she directed participants to the next stage. Inside, she felt the steady pulse of confirmation. The rest of the hunt unfolded without incident, the silver box now hidden away in Jennifer's possession. Relatives laughed over riddles and celebrated small victories, completely unaware that the real contest had already been won. Marians maintained her calm, ensuring the moment of truth would arrive only when the entire family was present to witness it. When the final clue was solved and the laughter from the treasure hunt began to fade, Marians invited everyone to gather in the sitting room. She spoke with an easy tone, suggesting they review the day's highlights before the evening wound down. Relatives settled into chairs and couches, unaware that the true purpose of this gathering was only moments away from being revealed. On the table near the wall, the television screen flickered to life. Marians moved to the side, holding a small remote in her hand. The first image appeared, an ordinary view of the sitting room from earlier in the day. For a moment, the family assumed it was part of the game's recap until the footage shifted. The room watched as the recording clearly showed Jennifer stepping toward the display shelf. The image captured her looking around, reaching for the silver box and slipping it quickly into her bag before covering it with a scarf. The movement was unmistakable, the intent undeniable. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. The light mood of the game evaporated, replaced by the weight of what they had just seen. Even the children stilled, sensing the shift in the room. All eyes turned to Jennifer, who sat frozen in her chair, her face tight and pale. Aunt Eleanor's gaze locked on the screen, her hand lifting to her mouth. The sight of her silver box in Jennifer's grasp drained the color from her cheeks. She glanced toward Marians, confusion and shock mingling in her eyes, as if trying to piece together how this could have happened. Without raising her voice, Marians walked to Jennifer's side. She reached into the bag resting by her cousin's feet and removed the silver box. Holding it in plain view, she crossed to a small device set on the side table and shone ultraviolet light across the lid. The tiny, glowing mark appeared instantly under the beam. It matched the position she had placed it days before, a quiet proof of her preparation. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no explanation that could undo what everyone had just witnessed. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Those who had avoided Marians for weeks now exchanged glances heavy with realization. Faces that once held suspicion now reflected a mixture of shame and reluctant respect. The narrative of the theft shifted in an instant, turning the accused into the wronged. Jennifer's stillness seemed less like shock and more like calculation, but she offered no defense. The silence she maintained only reinforced the truth of the images. The silver box rested in Marian's hands, a symbol not only of her innocence, but of the deliberate trap she had set. For Marians, the moment was not about triumph, but about balance restored. The sting of exile was replaced by a cool satisfaction. She had not needed to plead her case or argue her worth. The truth had spoken for itself, and every witness in the room had heard it. In the moments after the footage ended, Jennifer's voice broke the silence, offering hurried explanations. Her words were strained, grasping for excuses that found no footing. Around her, the family's reaction was sharp and unified. Low voices of disapproval, averted eyes, and the unmistakable air of betrayal redirected toward her. For Marians, the vindication came swiftly, yet the rush of relief was fleeting. Standing in that crowded room, she felt no joy in her victory. The truth had been proven, but the fracture within the family was too deep to repair. What had been exposed could not be hidden again. Several relatives approached her over the following days, offering apologies. They spoke of misunderstandings and misplaced trust, yet their tone carried an undercurrent of discomfort. Words could acknowledge the wrong done to her, but they could not restore the warmth that had once existed. Aunt Eleanor, shaken by the revelation, presented Marians with the silver box as a gesture of recognition. It was meant as a token of respect, a symbol that her name had been cleared. Yet even as Marians accepted it, she knew the gift carried the weight of everything that had been lost. The streets of Redfield no longer felt familiar. Each corner held a memory of a conversation cut short, a glance heavy with suspicion. She began to imagine a life beyond the town's borders, one where her worth was not subject to whispered judgment. In early autumn, she left quietly, her belongings packed into a single moving truck. Cleveland offered anonymity and the promise of new beginnings. She found work in a design firm, her days filled with projects and colleagues who knew nothing of the scandal that had driven her there. The silver box rested on her apartment shelf, polished and unassuming. To anyone else, it was simply an antique. To her, it was a reminder of the patience required to reclaim one's truth, and the precision needed to deliver justice without stepping outside the bounds of control. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would glance at it and feel the echo of that night, the calm before the reveal, the stillness after the room fell silent. Justice, she had learned, was rarely warm. It was measured, deliberate, and often came at the cost of what could never be rebuilt.